Her stepfather yanked her by the hair and slammed her down hard onto the floor. Emily Grace was just 22 years old, and her beauty had become more of a curse than a blessing. Jack Turner, her mother's second husband, was a man hollowed out by vice rotting from the inside. He had squandered everything on liquor and gambling. By midday, debt collectors were already lurking outside their rundown shack. Jack dragged Emily out into the scorching daylight, his eyes bloodshot with rage and humiliation. "Serve them," he barked. Emily froze. Terror locked her limbs in place. Surely she had misheard him. But no, her own stepfather was ordering her to give herself to the men who had come to collect his debts. Her voice trembled, her throat raw. "No, I won't." That refusal was like striking a match to dry kindling. The collectors snickered, mocking Jack, his pride shattered. He hurled the bottle in his hand against the wall, shards flying across the room. Then he stormed toward Emily and slapped her so hard she crumpled against the wooden planks. She tried to crawl away, but Jack's boot connected with her ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. She gasped and coughed, her body curling from the pain. The men just stood there, amused by her suffering. "You dare defy me?" Jack growled, his drunken fury boiling hotter with every breath. He seized her by the arm and dragged her out into the blinding sun. Her dress was torn from the struggle, her face marked with red welts, her arms already turning purple with bruises. She pleaded through sobs, begging for mercy, but Jack had none left to give. The collectors followed, sneering as though it were entertainment. Jack shoved Emily toward the riverbank beyond the ranch fields. The noonday sun burned against her pale skin, highlighting every wound, every mark. Her legs shook under her own weight. "Please," she cried. "I'm begging you." But her words only fueled Jack's shame. With one swift motion, he lifted her by the waist and hurled her into the river. Water crashed around her body. Emily sank beneath the surface, icy liquid filling her lungs. She thrashed desperately, but the current pinned her down. Her shredded dress wrapped around her like chains. She fought, but her strength drained quickly. Above the surface, the men's laughter melted into distant echoes. Her heart pounded wildly. Her vision clouded. Was this the end? Would she die as nothing more than her stepfather's victim? Just as the darkness began to consume her, a shadow loomed on the riverbank. A horse neighed, hooves striking the ground. A man came running. Without hesitation, he plunged into the water, seized Emily's arm, and pulled her upward. Her body went limp, but her eyes still flickered faintly with the will to live. The stranger hauled her onto the grassy shore, laying her gently against the earth. She coughed violently, water pouring from her lips. Her skin was blotched with bruises, her body cut and battered, her lips trembling as if words tried to escape but failed. The man stared in shock. This was Thomas Carter, a rancher in his late 50s. His eyes widened at the sight of Emily's broken state. What kind of man would do this to his own daughter? And what kind of fate still waited for her with Jack Turner and his thugs lingering nearby? Thomas lifted her into his arms. She shivered uncontrollably, soaked through and trembling. Her torn dress clung to her like a second skin. Without wasting a moment, he mounted his horse with Emily pressed to his chest and spurred it toward his ranch. The weathered wooden house came into sight. Inside, Thomas carried her to a bed near the crackling fireplace. He wrapped her in a heavy blanket, but her body still shook with fever. Her lips quivered as though she wanted to speak, yet no sound came. Worry tightened Thomas's jaw. He dug through a chest, pulled out an old work shirt, faded but clean, and handed it to her. "You need this more than I do," he said. Emily hesitated before slipping it on. The shirt swallowed her frame, the sleeves hanging over her hands. But for the first time in years, she felt a faint trace of safety. She drew the fabric tight around herself, staring into the fire. Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of flames. Then tears welled in Emily's eyes. Her lips parted, and she whispered, voice trembling. It wasn't the first time. For years, he beat me. For years, I prayed he would stop. Thomas clenched his fists but said nothing, letting her continue. Emily wiped her tears on the oversized sleeve. And today, he wanted me to serve his debt collectors. Her voice broke. I refused. I fought back. That's when he beat me worse than ever. Then he threw me into the river like I was nothing. Her words lingered heavy in the air. Thomas's chest tightened, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior, but Emily wasn't finished. Her voice cracked again. There were times I thought, maybe I deserved it. That I was cursed. That my life had no meaning. A sob escaped her throat. But when you pulled me out, I thought maybe God hadn't forgotten me after all. Thomas leaned closer, his rough, calloused hand resting gently on hers. You didn't deserve a single bit of it. Not one. The warmth in his tone broke something inside her. Emily wept harder, but this time her tears carried release. For the first time in years she felt she wasn't alone, but outside the ranch walls, the world still turned. And men like Jack Turner didn't forget so easily. The question hung heavy in the air. What would happen when he came back to claim her again? The morning sun crept over the ranch, bathing the land in gold. Emily sat quietly by the window, wrapped in Thomas's old shirt, her gaze fixed on the endless fields. For the first time in years, she felt safe, but that safety was fragile, like a pane of glass that could shatter with the slightest touch. Thomas stepped into the room carrying a cup of warm tea. She accepted it with a small smile, gratitude in her eyes, though behind them still raged a storm. Then the sound of hooves shattered the calm. A lone rider approached the gate. It was Jack Turner. He rode a weary horse into the yard, his swagger thick with arrogance, as though the world still belonged to him. He swung down and shouted, "Where is she?" Emily stiffened, her face draining of color. Thomas stepped out into the doorway, his stance firm, his frame unyielding. "She's not yours anymore." Jack let out a harsh laugh, the stench of whiskey clinging to every syllable. "You think you can keep her from me? She is mine. She'll always be mine." From inside, Emily shook her head, her voice trembling but carrying new strength. "No, not anymore." Thomas crossed his arms. "You'd best ride on, Jack, before my patience runs thin." For a moment, Jack's eyes burned with the thought of a fight. But even through the fog of drink, he knew Thomas Carter was not a man to cross lightly. He spat into the dirt, cursed, and swung himself back onto his horse. As he rode away, Thomas turned toward Emily. His words were low, grim. "This isn't finished. He'll be back. And next time, he won't come alone." Emily gripped the sleeves of the oversized shirt tighter. "What can we do?" Thomas thought in silence before answering. "There's one man who might help, Sheriff Hawkins." Later that day, Thomas saddled his horse and rode into town. The sheriff was an older man, sharp-eyed and weathered by the frontier. Honor clung to him like his badge. Thomas laid everything bare, the years of abuse, the crushing debts, and how Jack had tried to drown Emily in the river. Sheriff Hawkins listened intently, then gave a firm nod. "Bring her under my protection. If Jack Turner shows his face again, he'll answer to the law." Thomas rode home with a flicker of hope in his chest. But he knew one truth. Men like Jack Turner never surrendered. They always came back. And when they did, it would not be quiet. Before that storm breaks, let me pause a moment. If Emily's struggle and Thomas's resolve have struck you, now's the time to stay with their story, because what comes next will test them both in ways they could never have imagined. Night fell across the ranch. Emily sat near the fire, hands clasped around a cup of tea, while Thomas paced the floor, restless. He had seen the hunger in Jack Turner's eyes, the hunger of a gambler who had lost everything and craved vengeance. Suddenly, the sound of hooves thundered outside. Dogs barked furiously. Emily's cup slipped from her hands, crashing against the floor. Thomas snatched up his rifle and strode onto the porch. Torches flickered in the yard. A dozen men stood there. At their head was Jack Turner, wearing a crooked smile. Beside him loomed a debt collector, tall with a jagged scar slicing across his cheek. Behind them, armed thugs crowded the yard, itching for a fight. Jack pointed toward the house. "Bring her out, now!" Thomas planted his boots in the dirt, rifle steady. "You're not taking her," the scar-faced man sneered. "Old man, you can't fight us all." With that, the mob charged forward. Thomas fired a shot into the air. The thunder of the blast echoed through the valley. For a heartbeat, the men hesitated. Then, with a roar, they surged again. Thomas swung his rifle like a club, cracking one man to the ground. Another lunged at him with a knife. They collided in the dust, fists, boots, and steel striking in the chaos of the night. Emily's scream rang from the doorway. Two men seized her by the arms, dragging her across the dirt. She fought like a cornered wildcat, scratching, clawing, kicking, but one of them struck her across the face. Thomas roared and tore himself free, lunging toward her, but three thugs piled onto his back. He swung his fists, throwing men off, but their sheer weight dragged him down. They slammed him hard into the ground. Blood streamed down his forehead. Jack stood over him, grinning through crooked teeth. "You're finished, Carter. You should have kept out of my business." Emily's voice cracked with desperation. "Leave him alone." She broke free for a moment, rushing toward Thomas, but one of the gang shoved her back into the dirt. Jack lifted his boot, ready to crush Thomas's chest. Beside him, the scar-faced collector jerked Emily's head back by the hair. Snarling inches from her face. It seemed all was lost. Then from the distance came the thunder of hooves. Shouts cut through the night air. "Sheriff Hawkins! Put down your weapons!" Lanterns swung as riders poured into the yard, surrounding Jack's gang. At their head sat Sheriff Hawkins, tall in the saddle, his revolver steady in his hand. His deputies fanned out, rifles trained on the mob. Jack's grin faltered. For the first time that night, the tide had turned. But would it be soon enough to save Emily and Thomas from the final blow? The yard fell silent. Sheriff Hawkins raised his voice, sharp and commanding. "Drop your weapons, now." The gang hesitated, glancing at one another. A deputy fired a warning shot skyward. The blast echoed through the valley. That was enough. Knives clattered to the dirt. Pistols were tossed aside. The thugs stepped back with hands raised. Jack Turner's face twisted between rage and fear. For years he had ruled Emily with violence and terror. Now he stood exposed, powerless, cornered by the law. The sheriff gave a curt nod. "Take them in." His men moved swiftly. Within minutes, Jack and the scar-faced collector were bound with rope, shoved onto their horses, and marched toward town under guard. The glow of torches faded into the night, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the ragged breaths of Thomas and Emily. Thomas forced himself to his feet, wiping blood from his brow. Emily rushed into his arms, sobbing as she clung to his chest. For the first time, she felt safe not just in her body, but in her spirit. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of release, not despair. Thomas held her close. "It's over now. He'll never hurt you again." Emily buried her face against him, and in that moment, the long years of torment began to loosen their grip. Sheriff Hawkins tipped his hat. "You two have endured enough. Rest easy. Justice will do the rest." Then he turned his horse and rode off into the night, leaving the ranch quiet and free once more. The dawn came soft and golden the next morning. Emily stood on the porch, still wrapped in Thomas's oversized shirt, gazing out over the wide, endless fields. The horizon stretched out like a promise of freedom, of a life waiting to be lived. Thomas stepped beside her, his weathered hand brushing against hers. Their eyes met not as rescuer and victim, but as two souls finding hope in the ashes of suffering. What lesson does their story leave behind? That even in the deepest valley, a hand can reach down to pull us back into the light. That no matter how broken the past, there can still be a future forged from strength and love. So let me ask you, if you saw someone like Emily, broken yet still fighting to live, what would you do? Would you turn away? Or would you be the one to pull them from the river? If this story touched you, give this video a like and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the journeys ahead. Because in the Wild West and in life, the battles never truly end.